Welcome back and welcome to our media panel with media commentator Brian Edwards and listener columnist Bill Ralston. Let's start with an amusing video posted by AAP this week. The Australian Liberal Party's Shadow Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison, is giving a press conference. See what the pack of political journalists do next.
Just simply looked the other way and not lifted a finger. That's all right.
The political press pack. Apparently they wanted an interview with one of Labor's chief whips and took off. They did come back, though, eventually. Now, let's move on to more serious business. And as we've talked about before on this program, the rise of online content and advertising is proving a massive challenge to the traditional business of newspaper publishing. A PricewaterhouseCoopers report, the Global Entertainment and Media Outlook, confirms that the online advertising spend is on the up, while ad dollars are moving away from newspapers. And it says newspapers will lose their #1 spot to TV advertising for the first time this year. Take a look at these figures. They show how advertising spend is trending down for print advertising and up for digital, although from a low base. And these are circulation figures, heading down for print and digital subscriptions still low but trending up. We have two guests joining our regular media panel this morning. One of the authors, PwC New Zealand partner Paul Brabin, who says paywalls will inevitably become the new norm, and Phil Campbell, a long-time community journalist who was awarded a Queen's Service Medal last weekend for his services to sport and journalism. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Paul, if I can start with you, this PwC report, it says inevitably, isn't it, that paywalls will become the new norm.
Well, I think the key point is actually about content. I think consumers are the ones who are driving content to the online platform. I think what newspapers really need to do is understand how they get that content to those consumers, but also too is it sort of determine, how do you get people to pay for content that previously they've had free?
Yeah, it's a hard one to convince them. I don't think necessarily every newspaper would go behind paywalls, because some will choose to be like suburban giveaways and get by on the number of page hits, won't they? While others will be like NBR and put up the paywalls. And I think Fairfax and APN may well do that, but not all.
I think a lot of people are going to object to it, really. I mean, I would object to it. NBR does it. They have a certain amount of material in there which is behind a paywall. As a reader of it, I object to it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to pay it. And there's also a sort of a...
See, I do that. So
you do.
I mean, people make a choice, don't they, whether to pay for it or not?
You make a choice, but a lot of people are going to make the choice not to do it. And there is a sort of a democratic issue in this as well, isn't there? We're going to create a sort of two-tier system of readership, really, where people who can afford to do this, they'll be seeing this stuff, and people who can't afford it won't be able to see it. That's concerning to me.
Well, yeah.
I think there's an interesting point, though, is that I think if you think of the way we traditionally look at print media, if you look at the book industry especially, is that, I think go back 3 or 4 years ago, we would have said that e-book readers would take over from traditional book readership. But one of the things we have seen is that we've actually seen book readership blossom in New Zealand, because New Zealanders typically like the feel of tactile reading, either newspaper or
now
reading
the
books.
same argument can apply to newspapers as well. And if I look at the way I deal with the news, in the morning I get my paper. I like the feel of the paper. I like the fact that I'm running the show with the paper. I flick through, I see what I want to read, and what I don't want to read, I can go back and read something else. I can't really do that with television, and I can't really do that online.
If I can bring you in here, Phil Campbell, editor of Rotorua Review for some 17 years. What do we lose when we lose our hard copy newspapers, do you think?
Well, the nub of the job, or the role I had, was that we'd pound and report events from the District Council, which I came to realise was greatly appreciated by readership. And that's what's not happening in the provincials, and it hasn't happened in the metros for many, many years. But I found it a very good reaction from the politicians themselves who were reported, but it gave us breakout stories as well and cover other aspects in our communities. And not only that, it's the quality of the journalism that is going to be sacrificed, because the newspapers are cutting back on cost and wages and so on, and inevitably they're cutting back on journalists at my level because of their poor payments. The journalists aren't staying long enough.
Well, it's
And yet
crazy for the publishers to be doing this, isn't it? Because going local is the one thing that will save newspapers, because they can do what you can't necessarily do online. The local advertisers want a full page of their latest wares selling into Rotorua or in Marlborough. You can't get that kind of effect online. And if I was a publisher, I'd be pumping more money into the provincials.
Exactly. I see why they're cutting back the workforce. They're not cutting back into the management side of the structure, which just seems to be a little bit fat sometimes, which has led to the demise, principally, of newspapers in the States.
The people who support the paywall idea say you actually get a higher class of reader, and that advertisers will be attracted to that higher class of reader.
Well, that's a bit of a pompous line to take. The average reader isn't...
I agree.
Yes. And the average reader doesn't read pompous material. He wants to know what's happening in his community. Yeah. And the provincial papers used to do that many years ago when I started out, and they stopped doing so because of cost and economies. And that's what led to the sprouting of community newspapers. But concomitantly, they weren't getting the journalists of
quality. Do you think the newspapers
run them.
Across the board are dying, in fact? Do you see that scenario?
Well, I don't see it as a drear as it's being portrayed, because look at back over history. Stage and theatre didn't suffer too much from the advent of movies, or radio didn't suffer from the movies too much. They all took hits, but they're all surviving today. And I think newspapers may have to live with reduced profit margins, but it doesn't mean to say they're dead.
Paul, I think that's that situation, isn't it? The pie of advertising revenue may not necessarily be expanding that much. It's the fact that more and more slices are coming out of it from different medias.
Yeah, well, I think also too is that I think we look at newspaper organisations as media organisations today too, and I think that they really need to deal with the fact that actually the consumer's demanding content online. I think some of the views around the local newspapers are true, but ultimately it's the consumer that's really driving this behaviour. They're the ones who want the content. They want it delivered on multiple devices. They want to be able to access it. They want to be able to personalise it. And so I think also too is that we get to this point around, if you think about the consumer being the driver of this behaviour in terms of technology as well, is that a lot of these organisations really need to figure out, how do they deliver advertiser value? How do they actually demonstrate through both the traditional print mediums and also online that they can deliver advertiser value?
I think the average person wants to use all these media. They want to read the newspaper in the morning. Unless they're a news junkie, like my friend on the right here, they're prepared to wait then till the 6 o'clock news to watch the television news. And in my case, at least, I go on the internet for research purposes. I don't use it as a substitute for the newspaper.
I think most people would be in and out of the likes of Stuff and Herald and 3 News website and 1 News website during the day to get their latest news. I'm not sure. Well, the ratings suggest people still sit down at 6 o'clock and watch their news, but I'm not sure that's always going to be the case, even in the next 5 years.
Well, true, but I mean, to go back to the original point, newspapers, and I don't think television websites are that much different, can't afford to keep giving away their product. If you give it away for free, why would you pay the cover price, of a newspaper? So Warren Buffett in the States has worked out, go local, and then also erect paywalls around your sites. And he's actually making a profit out of those smaller urban dailies through.
So the newspaper wants to be operating as a hard print thing during the day and also on the net as well. So you've got to have a bite of both. Yes.
But it's interesting in New Zealand though also too is that we've seen readership of newspapers explode in the last 2 years, but that explosion in readership comes down to the consumers also the one that's demanding that content online. So they're actually accessing it not just through physical circulation, but actually they're accessing it online. They're accessing it on their mobile phones.
And there are things you can get from newspapers provide complex information. Television, for example, does not provide complex information.
All right, we have to leave it there. Phil Campbell, congratulations on your Queen's service. Absolutely great news. Also, thank you, Paul Brabin. Bill Ralston, Brian Edwards, thank you too. Now, before we go, let's have a look at an online slip-up on the day the Peter Dunne story broke. Now, I'll direct you to the top right-hand corner of your screen, to the URL, and it says, Peter Dunne, beep, resigns. Not sure who did that. Possibly come back to haunt you.